do you know?
Now.
Like and subscribe may look simple to you, but for us, it's very valuable. So make sure to support us, and thank you for watching.
The film opens with Helen, the wife of Wells, asleep on the living room sofa. She is awakened by her phone's alarm and begins her usual morning routine. However, it's clear from her character that she is deeply depressed, still reeling from the recent loss of her husband. Later, Tomas, a close friend of Wells, meets Helen at a cafe. Her grief is evident as they talk, her emotions raw from the sudden loss of her husband. Tomas expresses concern about her returning to work so soon, suggesting she hasn't yet fully recovered. Helen, however, insists that whether she's at home or at work, it makes no difference to her. The conversation then shifts as Tomas asks for her permission to continue a project he and her late husband were working on, explaining that he feels it's his responsibility to see it through. Helen agrees, granting him the permission to proceed. Helen is later seen at the office, wearing headphones and completely absorbed in her work, ignoring Alex, a friend and colleague, as he tries to get her attention. He eventually tells her it's her turn for the weekly task, snapping her out of her focus by asking her to roll the dice. Meanwhile, Florence approaches Helen and hands her the key to the lab where Helen's husband used to work, suggesting she could use it whenever she wants to unwind. Although Helen hesitates at first, she eventually accepts the key, and she is played by the robots which were developed by her husband Wells 6 years ago. In the evening, as Helen drives home, a single raindrop splashes against her car window, triggering a flood of memories about her husband and darkening her mood. When she arrives home, she cautiously approaches the bedroom, filled with dread. She hesitates before opening the door, and when she finally does, she is confronted by the untouched books, the bed, and other belongings exactly as they were before her husband's death, intensifying her sorrow. The following day, Helen wakes abruptly from a troubling dream, only to realize that her wedding ring is missing from her hand. Just as she notices its absence, her phone rings, a blocked number. On the other end is an unfamiliar woman, urgently warning her to leave the house immediately, saying that a man driving a BMW is coming to get her. As the woman speaks, Helen glances outside and sees the car pulling up. The man enters the house and Helen, following the instructions from the woman on the phone, quickly hides. Realizing her car is missing, she panics and makes a run for it, using the woman's guidance to evade the man as she navigates through her own home. With the woman's help, she manages to stay out of sight, but as she finally escapes, the woman gives her a final warning not to trust anyone. Afterward, the man who had been chasing Helen, named Kravis, contacts Thomas. Thomas had hired Kravis to check on Helen's well-being, instructing him to back off if she seemed fine. However, Thomas is caught off guard when Kravis reports that Helen escapes from him. Kravis questions whether he should continue following her, but Thomas firmly insists that Kravis leave her alone. Helen, injured in her leg, goes to Alex for help. He's startled when she suddenly appears and asks where she's been all week, mentioning he tried to find her but couldn't. She vaguely recalls telling him she'd be at the cabin, but her memory is hazy. Noticing her injured leg, Alex quickly brings her inside, offers her some shoes, and mentions that everyone is worried, especially since it's only been a month since she lost her husband. Helen, determined to piece together what happened, asks Alex to take her to the cabin to figure out where she's been all week. Alex drives Helen to the location she requested, and she goes inside the house, while he repeatedly urges her to go to the hospital. As she explores the house, Helen begins to feel strange, as if something is off in her mind. Alex notices her behavior becoming increasingly erratic, causing him concern. Stepping outside, Helen sees someone driving away in her car. Confused, she goes back inside and uses Alex's phone to call her own number. To her shock, the woman who answers is the same one who warned her earlier that morning. Helen hands the phone to Alex, and when he tries to speak to the woman, she tells him she'll call back when it's safe and abruptly hangs up. Helen then reveals to Alex that the woman on the phone is actually herself. Alex is skeptical, insisting that it's impossible, but Helen remains convinced. Meanwhile, Thomas is leaving the hospital after a checkup for the laboratory when Kravis approaches him, urging him to check on Helen. Kravis is concerned that Helen might know something, or that Wells might have told her about their project. Despite Kravis's insistence, Thomas remains firm in his decision and refuses to act on Kravis's suggestion, leaving him behind without reconsidering. Helen confides in Alex, explaining that she believes she has experienced time travel but he dismisses the idea, thinking it's impossible. She then shares that those who undergo such experiences often suffer from amnesia, just as she is now, and recounts details about Wells' situation, which brings a wave of sadness over her. Sensing her distress, Alex gently advises her to focus on the present and not dwell on the past, helping to calm her down. In the evening, Helen unexpectedly finds a metal briefcase under the bed. After 2 attempts, she manages to unlock it and discovers a weapon inside. As she examines it, Alex appears at the door and asks if the weapon is meant for protection against bears. Helen explains that the code she used to open the briefcase was based on her and her husband's first date, a detail only they knew. When Alex asks if her husband left the weapon for her, she responds that she had never seen it before during her last visit. Helen wakes up from sleep, suddenly finding herself in a disturbing vision of a dead person inside a car in the basement, a scene she realizes is triggered by the time travel technology. She then snaps back to the present and returns to the house, where she discovers a formula pattern. This clue makes her realize that Wells left her a message. Initially, Alex is unimpressed, but as Helen explains the physics and mathematics behind the formula on the board, his interest grows and he becomes more excited. Meanwhile, Kravis is on the hunt for Helen, using advanced GPS technology in his car to track her vehicle's license plate. When he locates her car, he heads to a nearby supermarket to search for her. Inside, a woman spots him and quickly runs. Kravis gives chase, but only catches glimpses of her from behind, never seeing her face, but she was Helen. Kravis snaps a photo of Helen at the supermarket and shows it to Thomas. He informs Thomas that this was her 3rd visit to the supermarket and mentions that she purchased a pressure cooker, suggesting it could be for something hazardous. Helen and Alex are desperately trying to understand what's happening to her when Alex suggests they call Thomas for help. Helen refuses, but soon she spots a car approaching from the window. It's Thomas and Kravis. They demand to be let in, and Helen, furious, realizes Alex must have called them. She arms herself and in a tense confrontation, manages to disarm Kravis. However, in the struggle, the gun nearly goes off. To create a distraction, she fires at the wheel of Kravis' car and then quickly drives away with Alex. Helen, furious with Alex for calling Thomas, abruptly stops the car and demands he get out if he isn't truly committed to helping her find the other version of herself. Alex, however, reassures her that he's fully on her side and ready to help. Calmed by his words, Helen starts the engine again, and they drive away together. As Helen and Alex are driving, Alex receives a message from the other version of Helen and reads it aloud to her. Just then, Helen notices that Kravis and Thomas are following them. She panics and speeds up, but while attempting a sharp turn, they crash the car. Fortunately, they aren't injured, and they quickly flee on foot. Kravis gives chase, but they manage to escape by catching a bus. However, Kravis can still track them easily, as there's an alarm bell in the gun Helen took from him. Helen and Alex check into a hotel, where they try to figure out a password they once shared. Despite several failed attempts, they finally reconstruct their past conversations and memories, leading Helen to unlock the password. What they discover is a shocking video of Thomas and Wells in a heated argument, revealing that Thomas was the one who killed Wells by poisoning his whiskey. Kravis tracks Helen and Alex to the hotel using GPS. As he moves in to capture Helen, Alex intervenes, trying to hold him off despite being overpowered and knocked down by Kravis. Meanwhile, Helen manages to escape, though she gets injured while jumping down to the ground to get away. As Helen walks, she pauses at a bar window, recalling the moments she once shared there with her husband Wells. The memory stirs something in her, prompting her to head straight to Florence, a close friend of Wells. Kravis interrogates Alex, insisting that Helen is paranoid and delusional. However, Alex counters by showing him the video of Thomas killing Wells. Confronted with the truth, Kravis shifts his focus, deciding to find Thomas before Helen can reach him. Meanwhile, Florence opens the lab door for Helen, puzzled by her strange behavior. Florence mentions what Helen had done earlier that morning, which confuses Helen even more. When Helen asks when Florence last saw her, Florence replies that it was just 15 minutes ago. Alarmed, Helen rushes out to find her other self. In her haste, she accidentally grabs a woman dressed in the same color, only to realize it's not her alternate version. Meanwhile, Helen heads to Thomas's house, only to find he has gone to the lab. Determined to confront him, she forces a stranger out of their car at gunpoint and follows Thomas. When she arrives, she calls out to Thomas, but his guards quickly detain her. As they restrain her, she insists she's there to save him. After hearing this, Thomas instructs his guards to let her inside. While Thomas and Helen are engaged in a tense conversation, unknown to him, another version of Helen is working behind the scenes, setting up the time machine and planting a bomb. Throughout their discussion, Thomas remains confident, believing he is in control and that nothing can harm him. However, as their exchange continues, he suddenly receives an alert from the security cameras. The footage shows Helen inside the time machine completing her task. Realizing the imminent danger, Thomas rushes to stop her, but he is too late. The other Helen successfully activates the bomb, and the resulting explosion sends Thomas flying backward from the force. Disoriented and defeated, Thomas is soon arrested by Kravis's team, who arrive on the scene to arrest him, bringing his plans to an abrupt and final end. The movie concludes with Helen gradually returning to her regular life, having overcome the heavy burden of depression that once weighed her down. She is now fully engaged in her work, collaborating closely with Alex, and shows a renewed energy and focus that wasn't there before. Her life, once marked by grief and sorrow, has taken on a new sense of purpose, and Helen receives a mysterious package. Upon opening it, she discovers it contains video messages from her husband Wells, along with clips of herself from the past.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch other recaps on the screen, like the video, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.